Oh,
Okay.
thank you, Anita. We'll do that, get that business out of the way.
Thanks, Annie. Great to see everyone. Sorry you can't see me. I'm checking in today from the land of bad internet, so we'll do the best we can. So we'll in our
Oh,
meeting. I'm Luther. I
Oh,
hope everyone had a great
man.
summer. When it comes to apprenticeship, we certainly see the Swiss as our role model. And we're thrilled to hear insights today from good friends who attended the CEMETS meeting in Zurich. So our includes, am I still here or not?
you're spotty, I have to say. And it's like I so want to make this work because there's nothing I love more than a good introduction from Luther Jackson. It's like we take this show on the road, but yeah, Luther, let's 100% Kristen. Yeah, totally. I mean, this group here needs no introduction. Anita, I'm thinking we just kind of get right to the talk and folks can introduce themselves in the chat. I'm not going to attempt to do the Luther thing. I think I'd love to hear from some of the new folks or new to me. I know Luther has been and Anita have just been doing a wonderful job in sort of trying to let people know in the network about what we're here to do and talk about. We're so delighted to have Vinz, Koller, Annelies Goger, and Krysti Specht here to bring back their top 10 takeaways from the CEMETS Institute. And so I'm just gonna hand it right over to, yeah, thank you, Mark. Mark kicked us off in the chat. Please do share your affiliation if you feel comfortable doing. We're recording this. Thank you, Anita. So we'll share this out on our YouTube channel. So Vinz, I'm gonna kick it over to you. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, I agree. I'm 100% with you about Luther's intros. They make the event, but we'll have to now fend for ourselves and see whether we can live up to what would have been the intro. So I want to set the stage a little bit, an introduction to CEMETS, because I know we talk about it and we assume that we know, but I don't want to make that assumption. And then we'll get into the top 10, because I think what CEMETS represents is important, because it's not about going to Switzerland, having a great time at the lake and all that stuff. It's really about a global community and what I think of as a masterclass in how to do career technical education, the dual model well, and how to learn from each other, all these other countries that come together, how they do it, and walk away with both understanding the complexity of the challenge and then sort of some of the unique challenges that we face in the US, and then some of the unique challenges we face in California. So just a little bit about what the center is. So the head of the center, Ursula Reynolds, was the what might be called a Secretary of State or a Secretary of Education, if there was such a thing in the US, in that sense, with that mission for Switzerland, with the express mission. This is now goes back almost 20 years. To reform the Swiss education system. Kind of, it's that intersection between education and workforce development. And when she was done with that, then the Swiss Institute of Technology, which is the equivalent of MIT for Switzerland, asked her to join their what I would call it's called the Inflation Research Institute, but really it's the institute that studies the economy. Join that institute and see whether we could learn more about the educational system in both the country and globally that would help us forestall crises or bounce back after crises more readily, and what education has to do with that. And that's the mission she's been on since she's joined that institute. And that's when they formed CEMETS, which stands for boy, I will not get the acronym right. Somebody will have to help me and put it in the chat. It's essentially studying a study of the economy and education systems. And her and Katie Caves, who is the person that some of you have met, and she's been, I don't know whether she's been on apprenticeship, has she? I'm not sure about that. Anyway, she is a transplant from California, grew up in the Bay Area, but now has been the director of the CEMETS Summer Institute for the last couple of years, and is somebody who we frequently see in California because she has family here, and we shamelessly take advantage of her visits to help her, make presentations to the folks in Sacramento and elsewhere in the Bay Area, wherever we can. So you'll hear more about that as well. So that's kind of the context. And once a year in the summer for 7 days or 5 days, folks come together again into this master class. They're admitted based on sort of a case that they have to make for their reform case from a half a dozen countries and a half a dozen states in the US, if there is interest from US states. And they get both lectures and they bring their case, their reform case, to the Institute. They get critiqued from each other. They get critiqued from the folks at the Institute. They get research lectures. They do site visits to companies, to intermediaries, to chambers of commerce. And they visit with apprentices to see what it looks like in an economy where, again, 70% of young people go into a work-based learning pathway. They have a full dual model, and they have sort of done the research to see what the effect is of such an endeavor. So we've had folks visit the Institute 3 times, I think, 4 times actually, over the last 6 years. And we're gearing up for another visit. I think there will be another delegation going next summer. And I would also say that most states that have had a significant reform case in the US, Colorado, Washington, Idaho, Indiana, Washington, D.C., New York, there are probably a few others, Colorado, of course, they've all taken delegations to Switzerland to either the Institute or some other visits to sort of learn and take their reform case and then adapt. It's never been about creating a Swiss system in the US. It's always about looking what are these elements that they have tried out and how to adapt them. So enough about the context, but that gives you an idea of what CEMETS is about. And I think without further ado, I think we should go to the top 10. And for that, I will see if I can share my screen, and if I can find my screen again where my slides are, that would help. Give me 1 second. There we go. Somewhere we'll find it. Okay. Let's see if that works. Tell me if you see the slide with a photo of downtown Zurich.
Yeah.
Do I come across? Okay, good. So it's a top 10. So we're going to start. I'm going to give you a couple and then I'll turn it over. We have, Krysti, who was there. Annelies was there. Jill Armington with CareerWise was there. She couldn't join us today, but you've heard from her last month. And also Ryan Gensler and Noel Ginsberg and a few others from CareerWise were there. Not top 10. The number 10 is the Swiss actually make good pizza. So a big part of our work happens after hours. This is a pretty grueling schedule. You get down at 8:30 to the lecture hall, and you're done by like 6 p.m. So it's not like there's a lot of free time, but we did manage to get to a pizzeria and keep the discussion going. This is the Colorado team and the California team, CareerWise in California, coming together and sort of scheming what we could do in California. And there was some good pizza. Oh, I speak Italian. I didn't see that note. It was made by Italians, I will say. The good pizza in Switzerland is mostly made by Italians. Who wants to take this? Is this, this might be one of, Krysti, is this one of yours?
It's not, but I mean,
Okay.
You go for it, Vinz.
Okay. I think one of the things, it's probably mine in part because I'm a little impatient at times. And so I would like to see results very quickly in reform. And Ursula, who has seen our reform case, evolve as we've gone multiple times, is the one who then says, it takes time. It did not happen overnight in any country that they've worked with. Some countries they've worked with for a decade on this. And most countries that say it's going to take, or states that say, we think it's going to take us 5 years to get there. It takes them 10. And after 10, you will probably have evolved into something else that might take you another 10. So it's a constant adaptation. And so time is both necessary. It cannot be done overnight because you have to build the constituencies and you have to build the relationships that are necessary. And so impatience is a good thing, but you also have to understand, and we've all had to understand, that the kind of change that is actually to create the systemic underlying structures that then allow for this to happen, they really require a lot of buy-in from a lot of different levels, and that just takes time. And that the fact that friction is there for that is a given. Number 8. I think this is Annelies, right?
Yeah, that's me. Hi, everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new ones. So yeah, one of my big takeaways was, and I hadn't been before, but it was really, Ursula made a comment that this was the first time at the Alumni Institute that she saw a Team USA emerging in terms of a conversation across different states. And that was sort of an interesting moment, because I guess I realized that up until then, we all kind of went in as different countries. And when you're next to Ukraine and Senegal and Nepal and all these other countries, and then there's the state of Indiana and the state of Colorado, like, it was interesting to hear that feedback from her, because I felt like we did start to have some cross-cutting conversations, and I think that's a good thing. And I wonder about how we could continue to do that in the future through engagements in CEMETS, but also like domestically as we all gather in different settings for different convenings. And then we could go to the next one, which is also mine, I think. We went to the Baselland Chamber of Commerce, which Baselland is the area, it's the canton, which is the equivalent of a state, has the city of Basel, and then the rest of the state area. So this is the area outside of the city. And I think it has, he said, only around 200,000 people in it. But they have this really interesting Chamber of Commerce where they have this this building that they built that looks like a WeWork office or a Google office, and it has workspace that they rent out, event space, both smaller rooms for gathering and like large event venues like the one in the picture here. And then they also have a restaurant and a cafe, and it's all very snazzy looking. And I think the real interesting part about the Chamber of Commerce there in this rural area was that they don't rely mainly on membership dues from businesses, but actually they have their own business services that they get, paid services that they operate. And one of them is to match apprentices to employers. And that's only one of them. And so I thought this was an interesting, both from a standpoint of like having these kind of work share spaces and incubation spaces be operated out of a chamber, but also like as a revenue model. I thought that was really inspiring. And I hope that if we do go back to summits, we all bring employer partners and make sure that we ask for them to take us there. Cause I think it was really cool to, it's inspiring to see that. And it was so successful that they are now building a tech specific one right next door because it has been so successful for them. And the other thing I thought was fascinating was that they have this Chamber of Commerce has 20 full-time communications staff. And I think about like Brookings is like one of the more active communications teams in the think tank world. And like, you know, at Metro, we only have like 5. So I think that speaks a lot to how much they prioritize like the communication aspects of what they do to get the word out, like both across businesses and to cultivate the sense of like marketing, like their homegrown industries. Next slide.
And I want to add one thing to what you just said about this chamber. One of the during our site visit of the chamber's building, we also looked at one of the workspaces that was part of this WeWork space, if you will, which was the architect that had actually designed the building. And they had an apprentice whom we met, who was from Ukraine and who was actually a refugee from Ukraine going through her apprenticeship. She had always wanted to be an architect. She was in a drafting apprenticeship, had just started. And again, you could sort of see the potential of both integration, of work-based learning, and business development, if you will, all at once inside the chamber. I had never seen a place where the chamber was playing that role, but Basel-Land is definitely not your average Chamber of Commerce in Switzerland either. But I think it's an interesting model. So yeah. Did you want to take that one, Annelies?
Sure, I can do this one too. So this is really about the idea that part of what makes so apprenticeship, unlike the US, in Switzerland and many other countries, most other countries, apprenticeship is just part of the education system. And it's formal, like it's when you get a degree through the applied university system, it's a formal degree, just like an academic degree. And so it's partially that it's formalized and normalized, but like everyone knows and recognizes that it means like a certain level or caliber of professional training. And that's partly what makes it work. And so one of the striking moments for me, I didn't put this takeaway in, but for me, one of the takeaways for that was when we went to this final dinner where we had apprentices serving us food in hospitality. At the end of the night, they Ursula, or at some point, Ursula had them speak, and they had their mentor speak, and it really struck me how the apprentices were like, so the way they were like, I felt so honored because I got to work with this mentor, and this mentor is the most famous for hospitality, and it felt like such an honor and a privilege to be working under her. And so there's a way in which what we often think of as an unskilled job or unskilled profession in the US, like has a certain level of respect and professional dignity to it, and like a whole set of kind of ways in which people establish themselves. And I think that we don't think about apprenticeship in that way at all. And we don't really think about sort of that the importance of having that kind of everything has its place, you know, and that everything has something to aspire to be a leader within that field. And I feel like we could learn a bit from that, not just how normative it is because everyone does it, but also how much respect is in all of it. I thought that was pretty cool.
And I think one example that this can also be created over a relatively short period of time, even in the US, is that these signing days that have been instituted in the US, so for example, in South Carolina, where they've been doing this for a while, they actually have created some of that culture where over time, both the young people and their parents are actually looking to this kind of an opportunity, where in the past they would never have known it existed. Now, over maybe a couple generations of young people going through these youth apprenticeships, that culture has been built up and the expectation has been built up. And over time, the respect that this kind of pathway commands has been built up. So I think these are very important lessons. All right, number 5. I think that's you as well, isn't it? Or Annelies, the qualifications framework?
I don't think so, but I think Krysti said she was going to do this one, right?
Okay. Go for it, Krysti.
Sorry, hold on. I'm just my internet, of course. Why wouldn't it be doing this right now? So one of the places we really started was thinking about really where to start, right? How do you roll something out like this in the US, in different states, and thinking about what are we actually trying to accomplish, and how are we trying to execute this on the ground? So we started thinking about a standard qualifications framework, and then really building out like who is involved, right? Who's really needed to be at the table? What are the stakeholders? What are their roles? Are they policy heads? Are they people that are implementing on the ground? What are the institutions, colleges, K through 12, higher ed, government? What needs to be involved? And we really wanted to build that out kind of early and think about that. And that's something that within Switzerland, all of the roles and all of the different institutions that exist, they have a very clearly defined role. Where in the US, all of our roles are a little bit muddy, right? We have people on this call right now from colleges. Well, to college, you're not only responsible for educating, you're also responsible for maybe credentialing. You're also responsible for transferability, for workforce development, for credit, right? There's so many different layers to all of this. And I think that we really found the anchoring place that we should really be starting is thinking about where do all of these different players in the US, because of course, our systems don't look identical to, of course, European systems, nor are we trying to make them such, but how do we actually really, utilize what exists in the system and build out a framework that actually works around what we have in the US. Next slide.
Number 4 takeaway.
Number 4. So this one is, I think, like a very, I love this one. Also, I keep thinking of Ursula saying, like, you must protect the baby, which is what she'd say, right? Like, you have your baby, you protect the baby, right? This is the work you do, you protect and you keep the work you do and you move it forward. And that kind of comes to mind whenever I see this. So in thinking about building out the system, at least in Switzerland, of course, understanding how the perceptions of the system and the metrics for overall satisfaction were really they're really key drivers, right? In the US, it's Orion. It's okay. He can chime in anytime. He knows this stuff. And at any time, an institution and body of employers, the government, somebody could become challenged with the way that certain things were rolling out. And to Vince's earlier point, right, it took 30 years really to get the Swiss apprenticeship or their vocational ed system really stood up, right? Many, many different reforms, many different transformations, and having to be agile to the needs of industry, education, and then what really the country needed as well, right? Adjusting to what the country needed. And so throughout all of that, there's constant buy-in and communication and having conversations, getting people to really let their guard down and be able to talk about where their challenges are. And that was a point that I think, here in the US, we do some of that, but also I think that there's a lot of different institutions and bodies where we're holding really tightly to really what we once were, or we're also anchored in a series of, we're competitive, right? We have to compete for funding. We have to compete for who does what. There's a nature of competitiveness that rolls through the American system at large. In Switzerland, it wasn't a palpable thing, although I'm kind of like looking at Vinz to see if that's really kind of part of the culture that, we weren't able to pick up on. But really understanding, bringing everyone to the table, that was so of the utmost importance for engaging everyone and understanding how to get people to yes. And that was a big takeaway that we worked with as well.
Yeah, and I would add that it's a very demand-driven system. So we sometimes have this impression that maybe European economies are more directed or more controlled, and some are. But this is entirely demand-driven. No student is forced into an apprenticeship. No employer is forced into hosting an apprentice. And no educational entity is, well, I guess educational entities are expected to make those spots available, but really it's a consumer market in that sense. And employers want the apprentices because it's good for them, it's good business for them. And in fact, as I've pointed out a few times, there's about 60,000 empty slots every year where employers want apprentices and they can't get them for the positions that are available. And all apprentices that want apprenticeships are getting them, with very, very few exceptions. So that's what also accounts for that idea of satisfying participating stakeholders at all levels. And that includes parents, is key. And otherwise the system wouldn't work. And so it's a good metric to use.
Yeah, and that's an amazing call out too, Vince, that you just mentioned around the, I forgot this point, that when we were touring the facilities and, meeting employers, meeting apprentices, what the employers said was very similar to what we hear all the time in the US, which is I can't find people. I need people. And so what that did was actually really open up that opportunity so that students could be really picky, apprentices could be really picky about what they wanted to do. And these companies were saying, this is our lifeblood, right? Like we have had apprentices, my grandfather had this business, or, we understand the value, which we'll go over in a later slide, right? The ROI attached to this, like there's value that's driven by it. And that was elevated as to why they really wanted apprentices. And also the apprentices could be very choosy. Annelies?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that what people were just describing, when we did the Basel on, I went to a manufacturing facility for the field visit, and they said to us that like they would host many more apprentices if they could find the apprentices. So that totally rang true, that they wanted more than they could get. And it's like a competition in the sense, the competition is for the apprentices at the moment. Yeah.
And the other important metric there is that that's with only a third of the companies hosting apprentices, right? So even with only a third of all of the whole economy on the employer side participating, you get many more slots than you need. And that's good news, because it does mean there are some companies that don't want to host apprentices, and there are probably companies that shouldn't host apprentices. And that's okay. We don't need that many, but we do need about a third. That's at least the experience. We probably need a third in the end of companies to participate. All right, we're down to number 3 takeaway.
All right. Take that. I'll take it. So energy without synergy will wear itself out. I think this rung very, very true to all of us, and probably many of us on this call who feel like they do a lot of churn and moving workforce along, moving apprenticeship along. They're interested in the expansion of it. How do you do that? What we really came to understand is that we really needed to move forward kind of the mission and focus of what we're trying to accomplish in both California and the US at large is an institutionalized event strategy. And that also means an institutionalized communication strategy and how we message out, how the apprenticeship system at large can really be more valuable for the training and education systems, and also how they can be integrated. And yeah, that was, Annelies, Vince, do you want to add anything to that one?
Yeah, I mean, for people that aren't sure what an institutional event strategy is, it means like what I've been doing at Brookings right now is trying to take stock of like how many different convenings have there been on either youth apprenticeship or youth pathways or opportunity youth or whatever. And you make a list of it and you're like, you could spend all your time just going from one convening to the next. And then Department of Ed added 4 to that. And then Department of Labor added a couple. And so like, rather than coming together and saying like, we're all kind of trying to solve the same challenges. We're using different languages, different funding streams, different metrics, and we're running around trying to get like what is like in a sort of a scarcity environment of trying to get the next grant. And we're spending so much time on that, you know, function that we can't actually get the work done and everyone gets burned out. And so institutional event strategy means that you're working across like these different stakeholders to make sure that maybe you have 2 major convenings a year and 1 or 2 specialized ones, but you're not doing this like kind of race to get similar funding for similar things, but never really moving the needle. So I think that was a Ursula phrase around institutionalized event strategy, but it's like, how do we actually align our time and our effort to actually move reform forward instead of just like scattershot everyone trying to build their own special initiative or whatever.
And that was also very visible. We haven't commented on the photos, but this is, for example, a banking center, a training center that major banks have gotten together and institutionalized. And one thing that we should probably point out is it's called the dual education strategy, but in reality, it's really 3-part. There are 3 points of education that happen. There is the workplace, there is the sort of general education space where young people go for half the time, roughly, a little more at the beginning, a little less at the end of an apprenticeship, to a high school-like environment where they get general education for the most part. And then there are these specialized training centers that are trade specific, depending on what your occupation are. And those you go maybe once a month, maybe twice a month, maybe for prolonged or maybe for block classes throughout your apprenticeship. This one is the banking one. And what it means in terms of the institutionalized event strategy is that, you know, industries together, because they have an interest in attracting talent, do these events to attract the talent. And you will not find, I mean, they think of themselves as completely allied with the high school that is a specialized high school that also participates. And they think of themselves as partners in educating these young people. So again, it's institutionalized in that sense. It's not so much that they do something, we do something. We are really meant to work together to form this new member of the community and of the workforce. So that was number 3. We're coming down to the top 2. Number 2.
To me, this one is my favorite, but also because I think when we talk about apprenticeship in the US, right, when we talk about employer engagement, we think about net benefit, we think about return on investment, we think about those factors. And in Switzerland, there's a lot of different data points around the benefits that are gained from hosting apprentices and the value add to the company, both financially, culturally, and just having staff that are growing into that company culture. So the first really kind of point I want to drive home on this is that, you know, the net benefit, which is really like, that is their gain in Switzerland, is 4,000 euros per year per apprentice on average. So companies are coming away with a net positive approach, financial approach when holding apprentices, which is beautiful to promote and also really interesting because there's a couple factors that come into this. And that really is also on how much apprentices are paid, how they spend their time, and companies wanting them to do skilled tasks, right? They find value in that in Switzerland. They don't want apprentices to come in and do just random things. They want to train them up, give them the skills to move forward, because then they're able to become net positive, right? Additionally, one of the points that's really interesting is about the retention rate. And the retention rates in apprenticeships are actually, as was said to us, deemed low. So 40% is the retention rate in Switzerland for individuals to stay on at their host company when they complete their program. However, companies see this as a net benefit because they were able to have a net benefit while the apprentice was there, but also they see that individuals tend to come back to companies and either work there again or they had a great experience. And so they talk about that experience. And so it ends up being great promotion, word of mouth. Also, they trained up some of their future employees potentially down the road. So that's a beautiful thing. And then one other piece to this I thought was really interesting is how the different like wages are broken apart. In the US, the way that we pay individuals as apprentices is normally somewhere from 50 to 70% of our prevailing wage. When we're building out an apprenticeship program. In Switzerland, it's only 17%. And they are able to actually do this because these are young adults that are in school. They're paid far less, but they're also doing skilled activities while they're in the actual workplace and then exiting with no debt. Beautiful, beautiful thing. And the potential to stay on at a company at a very young age. Of course, in the US, we have a little bit more of a fragmented approach and also need individuals who are coming in as adults to have a living wage. So that's another component of this that I thought was really interesting. Next slide. And this is our number one, the most beautiful image, I feel like, in the nerdy universe of apprenticeship that could ever exist. And that is the idea and concept of a fully permeable system, and that equity really does lie in a fully permeable system, right? We tackle that, I feel like, on a daily basis in the US, is how to actually make systems more equitable, make it so that people can enter and succeed as they wish. In Switzerland, one of the beautiful pieces is that you do not have an academic only system. You can move, flip, change your mind, enter, exit, re-enter into academic, into vocational ed, and move around as you need. And there are resources for you to do so, as well as no pressure for you to make that decision, right? We had engagements with apprentices who had changed their minds, who had entered programs and said, this isn't for me. I want to go a different route, and I really want to go this direction. And the system allows them to do so. In the US, we have a fully academic system, an academic only system, which means that individuals, of course, like ourselves, we were pushed through maybe a high school, college, graduate, PhD, who knows how high up programming, right? There's no alternative for us to really take the apprenticeship programs or the merge of workforce and education as one component and actually lean into that if we wanted to. It was academic the whole way up. And so that was a beautiful component of the Swiss system. Go ahead, Annelies.
Yeah, I just wanted to reply to one of the questions in the comment, because I think it pertains to this slide. It's about where do other 60% go if they're not staying in apprenticeship? So if you look at the slide, the box on the right, full permeability, and you see the academic one where we would recognize on the left side, the academic, high school into university. There, where they have VET, vocational education and training, technically we don't have that because the CTE doesn't require as many hours as VET does internationally, but the closest thing we have is CTE in high school, some youth apprenticeship maybe, but then there's nothing after that, which is what they call PET, which is the applied university system. And so some people will stay in the company after their apprenticeship. Some people will go into the PET, which is essentially this, let's say you're in nursing, right? Or whatever, healthcare, you'd go to the post-secondary level of that applied training. So it means that you'd be doing part of your time in the workplace and part in the classroom still, not in an apprenticeship, but in professional education and training. So it's called professional because I guess it's at a higher level, and you can get up to like a bachelor's, a master's, and sometimes a PhD in that applied system, kind of like what we might call in our system. Some schools have co-ops. It's kind of similar to that model. Vince can clarify, but the question about are you tracked, that's really what Krysti was saying about those cross arrows, right? So that's what permeability means, is that you can't just stack and move up in that pathway. You also can move if you want to move from VET into a academic degree, there's a clear set of steps to do that without having to start over. Because when you do VET in high school, obviously you spend part of your time in the workplace, so you miss out on some of the academic, more theoretical knowledge you would need to qualify for university. So that's about what you need to to do to meet those standards. So you don't have to retake all of high school. You just take some of the fundamentals of what you missed, and then you qualify. And likewise, you can go from the academic to the more work-oriented if you do certain things there, like in the training centers that Vince mentioned before, where you have more of that hands-on learning happening that you missed because you were doing your academic study and not the more hands-on stuff. So the permeability is that you're not tracked, because that is all, it's all there for you to take advantage of if and when you change your mind and you want to switch between tracks or continue on in your education while you're still working, and get a degree, or switch companies. Some people switch to other companies, and then there's sort of like a back and forth. But if you as a company get your ROI before the apprentice completes, it doesn't matter as much to you if people leave, because you got your ROI, if that makes sense. That's why having the longer apprenticeships is so important for the employer there, because that's how they get their ROI.
And I would just add, I think these are very important points, that's exactly why the 40% retention rate in a given company is not a bad outcome for them. It's also not a bad outcome for the system as a whole, because it's a stepping stone. Just like we wouldn't expect someone to say, oh, I got my associate degree or I got my bachelor degree now, I will never change. I will just now be that person that bachelor degree allows me to be, right? We actually value and expect growth, professional growth beyond that moment. And that's systemically what is expected, or what this fully permeable system allows to do. Again, very demand driven. And the most common experience that young people have starting out on the vet side and also on the academic side is that at some point they switch over and they decide, very commonly, if they start with vet, they realize, oh, now that I've done my lab tech apprenticeship, now I understand why chemistry is of interest or math is of interest. Now I want to go get an academic degree and maybe become a research scientist in this field, or the other way around. Now that I understand, now I want to get some practical experience. And the people that are the most valuable to the economy are those that have done that crossover, because they sort of understand both sides to what makes a career, the more academic side and the more practical side. So that is what equity then allows to, where equity really flourishes. And that was for systems that had more siloed experiences in the past. They had to get to this more permeable state. So that was number one of our takeaway. We got the list of 10 that we'll share happily, and maybe we should get into some questions before we talk a little bit more what that could mean for California. Do we have more questions? I've not been looking at the chat.
There's one in the chat, Vince, that says, what forces in the US are best positioned to drive some of these learnings into practice?
That's
what
actually
forces?
Great. That's kind of a great tee up for some of the stuff we talked about in both California and the US. Vince, would you care to do the honors?
Well, I think one force, I see three forces aligned that make this the perfect moment in history to make a real difference in the US. One is, of course, enormous demand for talent by industry, and a recognition that the way we've gone about preparing the talent has not quite worked out, and it has certainly not worked out equitably, right? So those two things combined make it a real driver that we need to find something that allows us to work in that intersection of equitable and responsive and an economically viable way of preparing folks. And it's not so much, I'm not a big fan of the idea that we have this huge skills gap, and if education just had a better funnel and filled all these skills into these vessels, then we would all be great and everything would be hunky-dory. I really do believe that it's a developmental path for young people that need to find themselves, and they need to find themselves both educationally and experientially. And that's that intersection. So that force, combined with the force that college, as we have been doing, is not equally affordable or accessible to everyone. And we got to find a way to make it so, make it more equitable. I think those are the drivers. So I think there is a receptivity in circles of higher education that this model may not be as great as we thought it was, and maybe not the only model. And so that, to me, is what's hopeful about the moment we find ourselves in. And now the question is, how do we marshal the forces to do the system building work, without which this would not work. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I just want to stack onto what you said as well, Vince. I think in California specifically too, we have a really interesting time, right? You have of course, a call to action from the governor for 500,000 apprentices. Of course, we're not close to that, but that still is a call to action and something that the Secretary of Labor takes seriously. You also have the expansion of funding that's been either through the community college system or through this, Department of Labor itself, Department of Apprenticeship Standards, that the data on those programs is not the highest, right? So there is not a lot of completion data that's leading to, there's interest in how is this money being spent? And should we think about shape-shifting how we expect people to deploy this on the ground? And so you have these kind of forces working in tandem, thinking, we do want to do this better. We do think that there's a window for this. And we have the money, we have the political buy-in, we have the momentum. You have people on the ground who want to activate this. You have demand for, new occupations that people can't keep up with. You're looking at reskilling adults. You're looking at skilling up young adults, to the point around colleges being incredibly expensive. There's nothing right now that sits within K through 12 that supplements this. Maybe this is a window. So I think that's kind of the conversations that we've also been having about how do we actually activate some of this work in the state of California. And then, of course, thinking about this on a national scale. But we've also looked at this as like how to activate this in different states so that we could showcase some of this work to really build a case for national momentum.
And the way I would also add to this is I would say that, when I say that in the US, apprenticeship is in a silo over here and the education system, it's outside of the formal education system. Partially what I'm also saying is that we've decided that work-based learning and anything really training related that's labor market focused is non-credit. We use like a deficit language that undermines the value of what it is and doesn't give the learner any sense of what they like, the status and the value of that learning, because it's a non-something. And what I see this system is in juxtaposition is a way to formalize that pathway as a normal thing that people do as part of their journey through life, that some people go through the round hole, some people go through the square hole, sometimes they change into a round person and they decide they want to go to a different hole. Like, that the economy needs people that like to learn by doing. The economy needs people that like to learn from books. And the more we can't start to recognize that kind of work-based learning as real valuable learning and like not stigmatize it the way we have in the past, and think of it as the thing that like the low achieving kids do, the way that we segregate the training from education, that's the kind of thing that if we can't overcome that and start to really give credit and value to that learning as part of a formal system, I worry that it's going to really, it already has really, I think, detracted from our GDP and our ability to get talent, leverage the talent we have, the full talent we have. And I worry that the problem will only get worse as the next generation, has not had even the access the previous ones did to some of these opportunities to enter to enter into a high quality job. So to me, it's also about sort of valuing learning and not having higher ed be the only arbiter of what counts as quality learning, but seeing it as like part of a system.
And I think there are some encouraging things happening on that. We have the California Youth Apprenticeship Committee that's tackling this issue on the Division of Apprenticeship Standards side. There have been very encouraging discussions with the California Community College Chancellor's Office and others at the, that are looking for ways to institutionalize and make applied degrees, applied credit opportunities available that go in the direction of a truly dual system. This little schematic is basically taking what we looked at in this more abstract version earlier and maps California institutions onto it. What would that look? What could that look like? What could the role of the 11th and 12th grade be? The community college could be, and the CSUs, for example, could be in a work-based, professional, technical based pathway, with again lots of crossovers between that and an academic pathway, so nobody is stuck in either one of those. So there's opportunities to connect and be part of the conversation for everyone on this call as we try to figure out a way to adapt what could be done to make the system more accessible, equitable, and ultimately give more people opportunity for a fulfilling and remunerative future.
And Jeffrey, I see your hand up if you have a question.
Oh, yes.
I actually have a couple of comments. I'm glad to hear that we're talking about California, because if we start talking about two states, we're going to have two different systems, both of education as well as of work-based learning, because both are based upon regulatory and legislative underpinnings, if you will. So if we're just talking about California, I'm encouraged. And the reason why I'm encouraged is because the funding for the community colleges for apprenticeship is actually fairly substantial. But I want to make sure that when we talk about apprenticeship, we're talking about credit-based or credit-bearing programs. When we're talking about internship, it's a little bit different, but it has a similar feel. And we can talk about both. The point I'm trying to make is that if we try and boil the ocean, we're never going to get anywhere. So we really need to start, we almost need to start a little small and a little specific. As my role has evolved here at Mission College in Santa Clara, I'm now overseeing apprenticeship and internship, and we're very successful in both. But the apprenticeship model can be much more successful. The Division of Apprenticeship Standards and the funding through related supplemental instruction, or RSI, here in the state is actually really supportive. We're working with some employers here in Silicon Valley on building an apprenticeship program around our mechatronics degree and certificate programs that are both credit bearing. We're working in several industry sectors right now in mechatronics. There's a lot of interest, but it's kind of like one small step at a time. If we can do one or two of these apprenticeship programs in certain priority industry sectors here in Silicon Valley, whether it's in water treatment or chip manufacturing or transportation, where we have a very successful apprenticeship program, or a few others, we'll begin to build that collective impact that I heard mentioned before. So I just want to say what I would like us to think about is, let's pick one or two industry sectors And let's pour all of our resources together into those, because if we can demonstrate success, and success isn't necessarily some benefit of 4,000 euros. The benefit, for example, to Valley Transit Authority, a place I was at earlier today with our college president celebrating the passage of 28 apprentices from their classroom to their on-the-job training. The benefit is that the employer has employees. It's just that simple. In the Division of Apprenticeship Standards and the related supplemental instruction funding supports that. And if we can build that in other industry sectors, not just in transportation, but in others, and again, it's priority industry sectors here in Silicon Valley, obviously transportation is one, but advanced manufacturing is another, health services another, and education is another. If we can build a few more of those, we can then keep expanding out. But I just want to say, what I've learned in my own experience in business as well as in education, it's really easy to lose focus and to think that we've got this huge problem. We do have this huge problem, but we're not going to tackle it just on the huge level. We really have to just be very, very mindful that it takes small steps first. And thank you, Vinz. You recognize that we're a star in building these apprenticeship programs. Certainly the transit one is legendary. Thank you. It truly is. And I wish I could claim credit for it, but I just have to claim that I'm now in charge of it. I didn't build it from the beginning. I'm just in charge of it now. But there are other ways that we can do that. And I just want to say that, you know, California is well positioned to continue to do this. Yes, we have support from the legislature, the governor's office. So maybe that's where we start. Thank you.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for that. I think we're gonna make that kind of our closing remarks, as the moderators forgot to indicate when we would be winding this down. But hey, that's the sign of a good conversation, right? Vince, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, and
Oh, yes, of course.
yeah, and Jeffrey, gosh, it would be great to have you at an apprenticeship to talk about your program. So would love to follow up with you after. And Vince, I know, did you already share out this amazing deck? Because there's some great images in there. People would.
Yes, I will happily do that. I don't think I necessarily stuck it in the chat here. So let me do that.
Okay, and I'm gonna hand it over to Anita, who does our sort of closing remarks. I'm gonna also save this chat as we like to share the results of this conversation, including the recording.
Thank you, everyone. This is amazing. Yeah, as usual, I'll be uploading this to YouTube and sharing that out to the email list. I can include a link to the deck as well when I do that, so everyone has the information at one place. But as I noted, if you're not already getting my emails, pop your email in the chat, or you can email me at my email that I'm now putting in the chat as well. And I'll add you. It's lovely to see our list continue to grow. I would also encourage you to join our meetup group if you haven't already. It's where you'll hear first about upcoming apprenticeships. We have one in the works for September, but haven't completely dialed in the host yet, so I don't want to make any announcements yet. But it will, as usual, be the fourth Wednesday of the month, so that's the 27th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, so you can mark your calendars for that. And I believe that is it. I'll put one more time the link to our YouTube channel. We're still working on an in-person apprenticeship, but not sure when that can happen. Yeah, any final questions or comments from the crew? No.
Yeah, I have one comment.
Huge, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my comment is the only time I've ever been called Jeffrey was when my mother was angry at me.
You should update your username to whatever you prefer.
It's Jeffrey because that's on my social security card, and that's part of the whole thing. But please call me Jeff. It's fine.
Right,
Otherwise, you call me
so
Jeffrey, I go, oh, what did I do wrong?
You're in trouble, Jeff.
You know.
Yeah.
Big trouble.
Thanks, everyone. And I'll include the chat in the follow-up email as well. All
And
right.
I'm
Have a good evening,
capturing these
everyone.
comments, Kristen. Thank you so
Yeah.
much as always, bringing so much to the conversation. I love that.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Have a good evening. Bye, Apprentice Sippers.
Bye.
Bye all.